tonight is for the committee to receive the recommendations from the Wind Turbine Study Committee. At the next meeting of the Planning Commission, there will be a hearing based on these recommendations, but tonight's meeting is not going to be a time for a public comment on the work of that committee. I should point out that the committee was formed just at the end of August, in the meeting of the Planning Commission on August 30th. They were appointed by the board on September 6th, had their first meeting September 15th, met fairly frequently, often weekly, 7:30 in the morning on Saturdays, and have produced what I think is a fairly professional source book of material and a recommended ordinance for large wind energy systems. And I'll call on Tom Alisankus, the chair of that committee, to make his presentation to the Planning Commission.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman Pro Tem and Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I've been told that I've had 15 minutes to make some comments on this, so I will be brief. To just carry on a little bit more about what Mr. Zweizig said about the formation of the committee. This committee has worked literally hundreds of hours on this project, mostly on their own time. That's in addition to the time spent meeting almost weekly since the committee was formed. Members of the committee did on-site visits to a number of wind farms that would be similar to the types that, using the similar types of turbines that are proposed for Union Township. And in fact, in at least one case, members of the committee went all the way out to the state of Oregon to visit, have an on-site visit. But also visited other farms a little bit closer to home as well. I think it's important to note that, one thing that's important to note is I forgot to turn my cell phone off. Let me do that first. Sorry about that. It is important to note that when I was approached to be chair of this committee, there were some intonations of personal feelings, emotions were running a little high, and I made it a point to people that were asking me to do this, that I would only do it if we let the facts take us where the facts take us. And if that meant that it didn't wash with perhaps some personal feelings on this issue, that's the way it would have to be. And I'm happy to report that all members of the committee agreed that we would go where the facts took us, regardless of our own personal thoughts about these items, these turbines. In addition to meeting as often as we did, the source book that Mr. Zweizig referred to is basically a summary of the actual documents that members of the committee poured through. I can report that this committee looked literally through thousands of pages of documents before coming up with our recommendations. I can also report to the Commission that from the start, our agreement was that we would only use source material that was properly vetted. And by that we meant material that in virtually all cases was peer-reviewed, or material that was cited by other reputable sources with approval. And so we did not use, at least rely on any information that didn't fit within those boundaries. Obviously, as you members know, and perhaps members of the public know, our charge was limited in the sense that state law only allowed this commission and this committee to concern itself with issues of health and safety. That made it a little bit difficult at times because there were other issues that came up that perhaps properly needed attention, but just wasn't within that framework. With that, I'll just mention a few things that we could not and thus did not talk about, and so you won't be hearing us talk about. The necessity of having meteorological towers to properly measure wind speeds in this area at the proposed sites. The issue of what the construction of the turbines would do to farmers' land, how that would affect the land itself. The issue of divisiveness to the communities, we found plenty of those issues. Property values, the decommissioning of the wind turbines, other perhaps more efficient and better types of alternate energy sources. None of those are in our report because we couldn't put them in there. That's not allowed. Nonetheless, the committee felt it was appropriate that you all as the commission at least understand that those issues are out there and you may have to deal with them at some point, even if just to tell people that you couldn't deal with them. About the ordinance itself, the committee started out by looking at the, what I'll refer to as the state model draft ordinance for these types of wind turbines. This was the ordinance sanctioned by the state as a model ordinance to be used and perhaps massaged by different communities to meet their own needs. And it seemed appropriate at the time to use that as a starting place because it seemed to have, it does have, the aura of state approval. I'm actually very proud of the members of the committee. One of the members took it upon himself to actually write to the authorities that were in charge of writing this model draft ordinance, do an official open records request to find and receive any of the scientific and medical documentation that was used in support of that model draft ordinance. Because those were the only things that we can use for our purposes. The committee was shocked to receive as a response to this open records request that in fact there was no scientific or medical documentation used to create the model draft ordinance. Instead, what we received was approximately 11 pages, most of which was various forms of minutes of the few meetings that actually occurred to produce this. In the end, it appeared that the ordinance itself was written predominantly, at least according to the information that was sent to us and given to us, predominantly by a power company from Florida. I think it was Florida Power and Light. That left us all with a sour taste in our mouths because that document has been waved in front of a number of communities as the thing to use. That we should just use that document, it's state approved, and let's just go with that. I personally read a court case where the one attorney was telling the judge in a court that if it was good enough for the state, it ought to be good enough for the local community, citing this model draft ordinance. We actually had the assistance, I should say assistance, Brett Davis, local representative, was very interested in the workings of our committee. He attended a number of meetings with us. He was very taken aback by what we found about that state ordinance. and in fact, that state sanctioned model ordinance. He was very taken aback that that has been used, and in fact told us that he was going to be looking into that further, and thought that there could be some substantial improvements made to that based on some of the work that this committee actually did. Significantly, the two aspects of this whole process turned out to be setbacks and sound. I might add anecdotally that the model ordinance that we originally looked at for those limits, setbacks and sound, there were several versions online that were actually being updated and changed as the committee was working. One of the notable changes was they rephrased the term noise and replaced that with the term sound. But those are the two aspects of this process that really are the meat of what, in essence, should be controlling in this ordinance. Because if you control you as the commission and the board, if you control the setbacks and the sound levels appropriately, there should be no issue with ultimate construction of these turbines, at least with respect to the health and safety boundaries that we had to live by. Accordingly, I'm just going to focus the rest of my time on what we found and what the basic recommendations are for that. While the model ordinance actually made the, quote, assumption that a 1,000-foot setback would be appropriate, we found that the majority of the scientific and medical documentation recommended an absolute minimum of a half a mile from a residence and 1,000 feet from a property line. I should hasten, though, to add that the majority of the information that we collected, which is, again, available to anybody that wants it, suggested even longer or greater amounts, averaging at least a mile to a mile and a half. But the absolute minimum was a half a mile. And so that's what we put in the ordinance that we handed out to you. The scientific and medical information that we used came from, notably, audiologists, physicists, acoustical engineers, doctors, and perhaps most importantly, residents. People who are going to be affected by this and who have been affected by this, and we felt that was appropriate to consider. We did find it was interesting on that note about residents, Lisa Daniels from a group called Windustry, normally associated with pro-wind groups. She's been quoted as saying, quote, "We have no standards, we need to listen to people who live near these things," end quote. And so we thought that if the industry if the industry itself is saying that, we should include residents as well. But as far as the actual guts of the numbers and our position, those are all of the that's where the science came from. We also looked significantly to the World Health Organization, which has been, their standards have been adopted regarding setback and sound, have been adopted by all the civil advanced countries in the world except the United States. The United States, back in the late 70s, early 80s, Environmental Protection Agency determined that those issues would be more properly left to the local communities. The only problem was the local communities actually didn't do much with it. We also looked to a place where they have a tremendous amount of experience with these things, and that is Europe, specifically Germany, where they've had these types wind farms in existence for over 20 years. And so that's where our information was received from, those professionals and those areas. With respect to sound, what we found specifically was that that issue itself, the only way to make sure that sound is not a problem is to do the appropriate studies beforehand. Quite frankly, we found some of the studies that have been done by the industry in general have been lacking when compared with the audiologists and acoustic engineers that we spoke with. I'm sorry, but I forgot to mention one other important factor here. We also, as a committee, sent out a questionnaire to all of what we call the stakeholders, predominantly the Eco-Energy, Public Service Commission, WPII, the companies that actually have a stake in this as well. And we asked them a series of questions, including what scientific data did you use to come up and support what you are recommending? We were not particularly pleased with the responses we got. In one case, even though there were scores of questions, we only received 5 answers back. But I want you to know that we gave them the opportunity and in fact invited them willingly, please tell us, so that we can be guided by what you're guided by. Getting back to the sound then, we again found that the whole problem area that a lot of people have been focusing a lot of time on can be solved by proper siting and proper testing ahead of time. If the community does that, and if the industry, the wind industry goes along with that, there shouldn't be too many issues left over beyond that. One final comment, because my 15 minutes expired 2 minutes ago. One of the significant problems we identified was enforcement. Again, not within our scope, this is beyond the scope of this committee, but a real problem for the commission and the board, because once these things are up, what is the mechanism for addressing problems that may arise if it's not properly done before they're put up? And with that, I will end my presentation and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Tom, for your report. I have a couple of questions. One is about the availability of material. My understanding is that every member of the Plan Commission and the Town Board have received a copy of the source book and the recommended ordinance.
That is correct.
And I'm not trying to impose burdens on the committee because I understand there's something of a budget. It seems to me that it would be a good idea for the town engineer and town attorney and building inspector to also have their own copies.
Okay. That seems appropriate.
I don't know about their need for the source book, but probably the engineer would need one.
Engineer, attorney, and
Building inspector.
building inspector. Might I just add, as long as you brought that up, one of the other things that we did with the final draft ordinance, no disrespect to you, sir, but actually something you can use. In addition to myself as an attorney, we did pass this ordinance by 3 other attorneys, one of whom actually practices this type of law. One of them was the town association attorney and executive director, all of whom wrote back favorably about the ordinance. And you may be more interested in looking at that, but...
Is that Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually might want to look at the correspondence.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, I know also as you've worked, you've also made materials available here at the library.
That's correct.
And I assume the source book and copy of the draft ordinance is available upstairs?
That was our intention, although I can't tell you that I personally have seen them, but that was our intention.
That's the plan.
And I think that's still,
Say that once more?
We have the source book is there.
the source book is
Upstairs. Final
there.
report is upstairs.
Is the rest of the material there too?
The rest of the material, except for the minutes from last two meetings, because
Okay.
the printer broke.
Okay, but my question really is how do citizens inform themselves about this? We'll be having a hearing on our meeting on February 28th, and
Well, my recommendation is, and this, our world seems to be teetering on information overload already. But this is a situation that if it's not dealt with properly ahead of time, there will be no do-overs. Once these things are up, they're up. So my recommendation would be that you at least look at the final report and the source book that you demonstrated. And if you have any questions about what you're reading, I'm sure any one of the committee members would be happy to try to address that. I know I would. I think Jim and Kathy, and I know Scott McElroy would, Mike, Renee.
Sue.
And if we don't have the answer, we certainly will try to direct you to the place where you can find it.
okay, well, we might want to think about how people find out who's on the committee and their contact information.
I believe that's on the information that's at the library.
Okay, good,
If not, I'll make sure it's there.
okay, appreciate it. So then the commission, it seems to be, ought to think about how you want to proceed. We had a meeting last Saturday morning. It was a briefing opportunity for members of the commission and the board. Not everybody was able to make that, so there's going to be new material for some people. I mean, let's say we have a hearing at the 28th meeting, which I think might take some time. Then what do we want to do?
The goal is, I'm assuming, it's recommending ordinance to the board.
Yeah, I think we're,
Whether we
The
make-
question is, would we be willing to recommend after the 28th?
yeah, that is the
After
question, thank you
the
for
hearing.
clarifying the question.
I would be ready to. I've been to many of their meetings and feel very informed on this subject.
All right,
Hey, just a question.
sure.
I know at the beginning of the process, there was an outline of the process
Mhm.
that started at the beginning and ended at town board consideration, I think. And I just don't recall whether there are any steps that we anticipated between now and that should be considered again. That was one thought. And then, although I understand you've had legal counsel look at this, I don't know whether the town is gonna want any review by me before you make a recommendation or not. If so, then you'll have to think about when you want that. If you want it before your public hearing, or, I guess my suggestion is if you want our legal review, it would be probably best to have it before your public hearing so that you can make any adjustments that we might suggest before you have a public hearing. That's what I'm gonna
Mhm.
Seems reasonable.
Can I just make a point of clarification? When we had the attorneys looked that over, it wasn't intended as a way of supplanting your role here. It was just to make sure that we were on the right track. And quite frankly, we wanted critical review. We wanted them to say, hey, look, you guys will never make this stick. And fortunately, we didn't come up with any of that at the end result. But it wasn't meant to say, so you don't have a role here anymore. I just want to make sure the
Legal.
committee knew that.
A town legal review is still appropriate in your view?
I agree, yeah,
Okay.
because you're gonna be the one that has to ultimately support this, so I do think that would be appropriate.
If we're planning to have a hearing on a recommended ordinance that's been reviewed, right, then we would have to have some lead time to publish that reviewed ordinance before the meeting.
That would be ideal.
Yeah.
The alternative to that is you you receive whatever comments you would have from legal counsel at about the same time you have a public hearing, but that puts people at somewhat of a disadvantage because they don't necessarily know what you're holding a hearing on.
Yeah.
We could get a review back to you within a couple of weeks, by
Okay,
mid-February.
okay.
What was the timeline, when we were supposed to, isn't this early that we're
It
getting?
is early.
So do we have time to get the review, to go over that at our next meeting, and then have the hearing, in March?
In terms of the moratorium, yes. The deadline on that is August.
One thing, I won't be at the next meeting.
February 28th.
I have another commitment, and actually it's coming up, I'm leaving town. I'm just wondering if we shouldn't have a separate meeting with this, the only thing on the agenda. I suspect that there's gonna have, a lot of people will have a lot to comment, one way or another.
To have the hearing be a separate meeting.
Yeah,
Is that, I'm just clarifying.
Yeah, and a special meeting,
Yeah.
Probably aside from our regular meeting, our normal monthly meeting. I'm wondering if we shouldn't set up a separate meeting just for that. And, go that way. Because I think once we open this up, and again, believe everybody should have their chance to comment, but I don't think we'll accomplish much else that night. But that would be, again, I got selfish motive, I spent a lot of time on this myself,
Mhm.
and, but I made commitments before this even started.
Well, it seems reasonable that we should offer up enough time for review and get that review back and still be able to read it for next month's meeting. I mean, that's
At
quite a
the
bit
commission level. And then
Yeah.
schedule a public hearing to follow.
in March. But I mean, that would cut us down to 10 to 14 days to read your comments, if you could get it out in 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I haven't seen this yet, so is it actually an ordinance at this point? I mean, that's what we have, is a draft ordinance? Okay. Oops. And all the supporting, and then there's when you refer to the source book, is there an actual report as well? With
That's
mi-
the source book. In terms of a summary of that,
Like
are
an
you
executive
asking?
summary of your findings and recommendations and what the data was supported on that? Is there
I
something?
don't know in the design that you're thinking. We have that information. I don't know that we put it like in a 1 or 2 page review like that.
There's someone I could talk to, like yourself.
Absolutely,
If
that would
I-
be fine.
Where do I find something?
Sure, yeah, that would be fine.
I guess I had one other question. There's been a fair amount of work spent on a small wind energy system ordinance as well, which I believe will be on the agenda next week. And has the committee looked at that and with an eye towards making recommendations that would be appropriate, given whatever recommendations you've made here, so that we aren't doing something that is inconsistent without a good reason?
I know we were initially given the opportunity to do that, and we decided as a committee that it would not be appropriate to focus back and forth between the two, that our charge was only for the large ones. So while we looked at it briefly, I think that took up about half of one meeting or less, and that was it. We decided that this was what we were asked to do, not the others. So we did not do any comparison between the two or anything like that, anything substantial anyway.
In terms of scheduling an extra meeting in March, that's one that I wouldn't be able to make, because I won't be in town. But the March meeting could be the hearing meeting, and try to keep agenda items to a minimum. Any other thoughts?
I prefer try and keep it on a regular night. I agree with Kim that there's a lot going on, may just be a late night. My schedule is pretty full.
Okay, so the agenda item, just trying to summarize for the February 28th,